everyone. I want to start off with a question. Who are you? And as you ponder to think about your own identity, have you ever had the experience of people thinking something about you that was completely one-sided? Now think about, what if those people were the ones writing your story for the next 100 years? I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And one of the main things that people know about my hometown is a massacre. And really one of the only things that people remember about my hometown. But even though the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921 has been the subject of movies, TV, research, books, there's always this circulating narrative that's gone on for over a century of one story of destruction, of the burning of one of our most prosperous Black communities in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that we also call Black Wall Street, in Greenwood. But the question is that the only story? Is it possible to reframe an entire community's legacy to both acknowledge its truth, but also take into account the spirit of resilience, the spirit of entrepreneurship, excellence in education, and power? Can we reframe this story to look at more than one side? If you had asked me this question when I was younger, I probably would have said it's impossible. Because when I was younger, when my dad first told us about Greenwood and the story of Greenwood, I was still trying to figure out my own purpose, my own identity in this story. And there was always this thing nagging at me. I'm caught between two worlds. I'm trying to tell the truth about our history, but also cling to something that is positive. Cling to something that can give me hope in stories of trauma, Black death, violence, oppression, searching for life in stories of death. Now, when I was growing up, I'm going to admit something to you. I didn't want to be an archaeologist or a National Geographic explorer, because I didn't know what that was. I'd never seen that before. And in my reality, a Black archaeologist does not exist. So I thought that my purpose, my identity, must lie somewhere else. And in high school, one of the classes I took was an Oklahoma history class. And this was actually my first introduction to the world of archaeology. I took an Oklahoma history class by Mrs. Barbara Coleman. She was a small, petite Black woman with an afro that shined when she walked. And on the first day, she passed out this book. And this was a book published in 1994. I was taking the class in 2004. This is a 10-year-old text meant to encompass everything we needed to know about Oklahoma's story, with 10 years missing. So on the first day, Mrs. Coleman passed out the books, and she told us to immediately throw them out. We're not going to be using that book. Instead, I'm going to tell you what I know about Oklahoma. And the way she told the story of Greenwood, it was never this one-sided narrative. It was layered, it was complex, and she really brought the story to life, giving us a behind-the-scenes look of what it felt like to be a young Black woman, a young Black girl growing up in Greenwood. What are the stories you'd hear, the people you'd meet, the events happening in these spaces? And she did the same thing for all the other Black towns in Oklahoma to give us this understanding. So as she told the stories, it painted a picture for me that she could layer in these realities of racial violence and oppression, but also tell the truth about Black excellence at the same time. And that was the first time I'd seen that done. She could tell these stories with layered, complex histories that were intertwined. And oftentimes, the way she told it, the stories were just as colorful as she was. So after I graduated from high school, from Booker T. Washington. I am going to college, but my reality didn't change. A Black archaeologist doesn't exist. So again, I'm still searching for purpose. But the funny thing is about purpose, there's more than one way to find it. And sometimes it finds you instead. So I went to college, and in the course of getting my degrees, I got degrees in psychology, classics, anthropology, all trying to answer this question, who are you? But that question, and the answer to that question, was buried under layers of these false narratives. False narratives that I carried with me from high school. A Black archaeologist doesn't exist. And false narratives that I carried with me into college. And I actually picked up another bad narrative along the way when I got to graduate school, except this one was a bit more beyond my control. This one that I picked up in graduate school said that good archaeology is done completely separate from your research. You can't get emotionally involved. You can't be personally connected. To do archaeology, it needs to be objective. And to do this work, you need to leave all your biases as a Black woman at the door. You can't hold two identities at the same time. But graduating with my PhD, I was still buried under these narratives. But one of the narratives that I thankfully was able to shake was that whenever I was graduating, the main headline that people heard was, Dr. Alicia Odewale is the first person to get a degree in PhD in anthropology at TU. But what people don't know is that when I was admitted into the program, I was admitted on a provisional probationary status because they assumed my educational background would not be up to the quality of the rest of the cohort. So I was forced to take leveling classes at the undergraduate level for a year to prove that I could make it with the rest of the doctoral students in the program. But then a funny thing happened again. I was the first one to graduate. Thank you. So as I was coming into this now PhD journey, did my reality change? That question of, does a Black archaeologist exist? But there's something still nagging at me, this caught between two worlds feeling, trying to tell the truth about our history, but hold on to silver linings wherever we can find it. So I was able to start a whole research program to operate in these two spaces. And the lab that you're looking into now is called the Historical Archaeology and Heritage Studies Laboratory, balancing this world of historical archaeology and heritage, and understanding this ancestry space and how we're personally connected to these stories, but also doing archaeology that is robust and meaningful and impactful in all the ways. And you can see one of our guests here, Justin Dunavant, he spoke on this stage 2 years ago, if you remember. But this story, walking into this journey after I graduated, now I was able to sort of take off some of these narratives that I had buried myself under. And I was allowing others to write this story. Now I can create space for myself in this. And space for others as well. So then I started taking on students. And as you're taking on students, one of the things that I look towards is being able to not only mentor, but create space. Space for others who experience that same sort of gatekeeping that I experienced when I started. So I love tearing down doors. But one of the ways that we're doing archaeology that's shifting this narrative and answering this question of who are you, one is through artifacts. So we're looking at some objects here in the lab, but another way we're looking at archaeology in new ways is through historical photos, like this one. This is John and Lula Williams and their son W.D. Williams sitting in one of the first cars in Greenwood. And this is a family that was hustling. When John bought this car, he learned all he could about how to maintain it. Then they opened up the Williams One-Stop Garage, which was next door to their confectionery that they owned and the donut shop they owned and the 750-seat theater they were running called the Dreamland Theater. And this is just one family in Greenwood. Another thing we're using is historical newspapers. These are clippings from the Tulsa Star, Greenwood's oldest Black-run newspaper. And some of the clippings just show some of the businesses that are represented here. But in the top left, you'll see an ad for the Red Wing Hotel. This was one of the many businesses run by women in Greenwood, similar to a store that one of my ancestors ran. Her name was Mary Ware, and she owned a grocery store at 709 North Greenwood. Another way we're using archaeology to tell new stories in Greenwood is to remap the district and show how the footprint of the district has been shifting over time and really being encroached upon over time. But over the course of 100 years, from 1921 to 2021, we're trying to tell a larger story of how the community rebuilt and bounced back. And we can do that through the landscape as well. So, after I graduated, one of the things that I was able to do was lay down that narrative, finally, that a Black archaeologist doesn't exist. Because I ran into a whole collective called the Society of Black Archaeologists, founded by Justin Donovan and Ayanna Fuwellem when they were just undergraduate students. And so in their work to make space for others, they created space for me. And I'll eternally be grateful for that. But I'm also grateful to have this body of scholars who are doing archaeology their own way all over the world. So getting back into Greenwood and the historic Greenwood, the question of whether I should start an archaeology research project there was still something I didn't think I had the power or capacity to do. Because again, good archaeology means not being personally connected, right? But as I was, one thing that bothered me about the story of Greenwood, when you hear the story over and over and over again, this narrative of destruction seems like the destruction of Greenwood was complete in 1921, as if there's nothing above or below ground to ever speak to this story again. As if the thousands of people who saw their homes, schools, churches, and businesses torched and bombed overnight, and the hundreds of people who lost their lives entirely, how we can just act like the whole landscape was swiped clean. But that's been the narrative for a long time. And the other side of this narrative is the searching, the endless searching. And in the recent news, the search for mass graves that a lot of people have talked about, it's still highly controversial in our city, in our community. But after June 25th, 2021, when those last rounds of excavations were done, we identified 36 previously unknown and unmarked graves that were lost to history. But what a lot of people don't know is that many of those bodies are children. So in all of this, we're trying to still understand our family connections in this as we do this research. And speaking of family, I didn't know I was personally connected to this until one of our students actually found the census page from 1920. And on this census page, this is a census taken in Tulsa in 1920. There's a name there, Robert Ware. He's actually my second great uncle. And he was going to Dunbar grade school. He's 12 years old at the time the census is taken. And thinking about how I'm personally connected to this story, I found empowerment in that maybe I could do archaeology a new way with these personal connections and dive deeper into this story. So we started our research with one site, Standpipe Hill. And Standpipe Hill, for those who aren't familiar with Tulsa, is a very highly elevated space close to downtown, but it's overlooking most of the city when you're up there. And this drastic elevation change is important because this is where the most affluent members of the Greenwood community were living at the time. So if you can imagine the hatred, the jealousy, the racism, the prejudice that's circulating among the community already, among white Tulsans, having to physically look up to this space where there's wealth on display for everyone to see would have been infuriating. And this is before 1921. So while we're up there doing a survey with our students, something started to happen. The trees that were standing there in silence, they had the best story to tell. All of our artifacts were pointing to one specific grove of trees in this northwest corner on this hill, which I'm pointing to you on the slides. These trees are growing in a square shape, which is not normal, but they're growing in a square shape around a structure that's no longer above the surface. And so these trees are actually trying to tell us something. So instead of just doing the normal, quote unquote, archaeology research that we were trained to do, we decided to go deeper and look at the trees, and we brought in arborists to help us identify these trees to species and give us an estimated age. What we learned is that these trees are pretty special. They're hackberry trees. And hackberry trees have a really unique feature in their bark. And bark, like our skin, it shows scars, it can hold memory, it can bear witness to what a tree has been through in its entire life. And one of the things that hackberry trees do, that they're known for, is that when a forest canopy is cleared, when there's a forest fire, and all the vegetation is burned to the ground, hackberry trees are often the first ones to grow back. And when they grow back with memory. And they grow a thicker, wartier bark to insulate themselves from future damage. These trees, growing in this northwest corner, where all of our artifacts, our feature evidence, our slope patterns are driving us to, they're telling us what happened here. And they're holding space for a structure that's no longer visible above this surface. But another thing it's doing is all of their roots that are searching for water, they're pushing artifacts up to the surface. So these trees have been our silent partner in this project the entire time. But I didn't just find trees on this hill. I found my family. I found myself. So as you're thinking about this story, one of the things that we're working to do as we're trying to reframe both the story of Greenwood and archaeology is to be able to understand more about our history. And as I said, coming into this space where you have a collective of scholars doing this work, it makes it easier to now rewrite the rules and then create space for others to do the exact same thing. So I started this project, but it turned into this collaborative research project between myself and Dr. Parker Van Valkenburg, who is my co-creator and co-director in this work. Our project is called Mapping Historical Trauma in Tulsa from 1921 to 2021. And we've been able to not just find historic structures, but find artifacts and find people that weren't previously connected. Now we're connecting back together. And as our state has made things a bit harder to teach this history, we've been able to partner with other folks and find community in other projects, such as Ashley Lem Sinclair's 2892 Miles to Go project, which you'll hear about shortly, Christy Williams' Black History Saturdays program, ensuring that Black history is taught in Greenwood, and a new nonprofit organization that I'm working to launch at the end of this year called the Greenwood Diaspora Project, that's working to support teachers, students, and descendants across the Greenwood diaspora. So I'm going to leave you with this question again. Who are you? And as you're thinking about that, who are you allowing to write your story? And I hope, if nothing else, that you remember to unbury yourself from the narratives that might be holding you back. And when you think about Tulsa and you think about Greenwood, remember that we're so much more than a massacre. Thank you.